Frank Castle?
I got something I need to show you.
I started watching Marvel's Netflix series The Punisher. I watched the first episode, which I thought was decent, but I had the sense that the whole series was going to be bland. This is not the first time this has happened. So I switched over to a series I had already seen. I had always personally drawn some comparisons between Mr. Robot and Daredevil. On the surface, these shows are a little similar. The tone is dark. They're both set in New York. There are elements of seediness, criminality, organizations, dangerous plots, and alter egos. And if you see Elliot's hacking as a kind of superpower and his mental illnesses as a disability that keeps people at arm's length, well, I think you can see the comparison. But this time, rewatching Mr. Robot, I found myself leaning forward in anticipation, noticing how specific every scene was, noticing 1, how much I remembered, 2, how much I was invested, and 3, how unlike any other TV show it was. When I watched Daredevil for the first time, I thought it was great. But as more and more of the Netflix superhero shows came out, the more apparent how generic they all were. The action stopped being impressive and started looking routine. The ultra-serious, intricate plots never really led anywhere worthwhile, and the good character flourishes were padded with paperwork, reporting, menial tasks, boring characters, and generic scenes. Whereas Mr. Robot, the property only seems to increase the more I rewatch it. But Mr. Robot also tackles fairly boring subject matters. Economics, business, hell, computers. So what's the difference? On the surface, the difference seems quite clear. Mr. Robot is famous for its quadrant framing, preferring to keep characters to one square of the screen. It's one of the only shows that does this. But this isn't just a gimmick to be edgy.
Hold on, man. This just don't feel balanced. Good God. All right, get some vitamins, man. Get some sleep. Y'all millennials don't take care of yourself.
There's an internal logic in the way that characters are positioned. For instance, basic film language will have a character on the left and a character on the right. The person on the left typically hugs the left side of their individual shot. The person on the right hugs the right side. This feels natural, but in Mr. Robot, the person on the left almost always hugs the right side, and vice versa. This feels unnatural, not in a way that's unprofessional, but intentional. Most of the characters exhibit an inability to connect.
Not the loquacious type. I get it.
When I watch what should be a simple conversation, but I feel uneasy or claustrophobic, then I think a show like Mr. Robot is doing its job right. I'm not recommending that Daredevil or any show adopt this visual style, but it's that Mr. Robot has a visual style that is wholly unique to its story. Breaking Bad has that down-to-earth skateboard vibe which expresses frenetic realism. Sense8 has a wandering, spinning camera with bright colors, so that it intercuts seamlessly across different parts of the world. Hannibal revels in the bleak but surreal tableaus of murder. And I'll be fair, Daredevil has good visuals, good lighting, good framing, and the occasional long take, but those aren't exclusive to Daredevil, and trying to remember specific scenes can be blurry.
I'll go see those stupid Marvel movies with her.
Think of what the visual language of Mr. Robot informs the audience. This off-kilter framing makes the story a little paranoid, which is perfect for a criminal hacker with a mental illness. Mundanity is transformed into slight madness.
So I'm asking you to help me with the task at hand and not look where you don't need to.
Again, there's nothing wrong with Daredevil's visuals, though I do think too much is hidden in the dark. I love the lighting in the scene, but what does that really say, other than tenderness? Karen and Ben Urich share a lot of scenes where they swap investigation notes, but the location is fairly unimportant. A diner, another diner, a car, the office, a car, a pier. Whereas in Season 2 of Mr. Robot, knowing that all our main locations are actually set in a prison, these scenes have to be set in a diner. These scenes have to be set on a basketball court. Any change of location changes the entire context of the scene, something that isn't explicitly shown but left to your imagination. And more importantly, what do you remember? I find myself able to imagine scenes of Mr. Robot in my head because of how distinct they are. I can see the cyan and magenta lighting in the diner. I can see the eerie, minimalistic room where Angela meets White Rose. I remember the Ferris wheel scene and how the carts drop behind them violently. Does anybody remember when a ninja attacked Matt in his apartment? I forgot about that one. Daredevil does have some incredibly iconic shots, but they're few and far between, which leaves me with an empty impression of the show overall. Generic, specific. Also, ceilings. Inherent to watching television, there are going to be characters that you like less, maybe even dislike. The characters I find most boring to watch are Karen and Angela. And to be clear, I think both of these actresses are fantastic. I just care less when they're on screen. Both portrayed as modest go-getters, with empowering desk jobs and a Nancy Drew complex.
If we're going to be Nancy Drewing together, I think a certain level of honesty is required.
Revolving romantically around the leads because they have little else to do, with just a hint of a dark past or a dark future to keep them a bit more interesting than they actually are. Oh, and they're both pretty women in a man's corporate world.
Then Lloyd was able to influence Lloyd.
Actually, just 1 second.
Do they all end up working for you after you get them off for murder, or just the pretty ones?
You give us a minute, please.
I challenge you to watch any show and only watch the scenes with the character you dislike the most.
Can you help? Can you look? Do you see anything?
Well, by doing this, you divorce that character from what you love, which clarifies exactly how you feel about that character. Maybe you notice how thin their character traits are. And maybe you notice their overall purpose in the show. Is that character just strung along the hero's arc, or do they have their own push and pull on the narrative and emotional growth? Watching Daredevil with only Karen, most of her scenes consist of lighthearted moments with Foggy.
The correct answer is yes, and you sound amazing.
Financial and legal dealings.
Upon execution of this agreement, the corporate interests, as they currently exist, agree not to pursue legal action against you.
Investigating.
Researching, gathering facts. It's long and boring and complicated, and half the time you still come up empty.
Yeah. And emotionally supporting other men. What's consistent is that none of these scenes say anything personal about Karen Page, the woman. Like, if you had to write down her personality traits, it would be really difficult. I sampled 5 scenes from each show and wrote down Karen's dialogue and Angela's dialogue, and searched for the word they used most. Excluding everyday words like just, yeah, and Karen uses most often Matt, Fisk, and Frank, words clearly about other people. This is Karen's purpose, to describe other characters.
He's the kind of man who hurts people.
We're not talking about something that happened to Frank Castle. We're talking about something that is happening to him.
I'll take the devil of Hell's Kitchen over Fisk any day. Plus, he kicks ass. No, you should have seen the way that he was flipping around in the rain.
I actually had a hard time sampling Angela's scenes because they're much shorter and she rarely speaks in them, which showed me how reserved the character is meant to be. That doesn't necessarily make her interesting, but it makes her intentional. Her most popular word is want. Sometimes this is what Angela wants.
It's what I want.
Or she's asking what someone else wants.
Look, I don't know what you want.
But it's always goal-oriented.
So tell them whatever you want.
That's just not the real world. Even if I want it to be.
That being said, Angela still revolves around left-brain subjects like business and economics. Karen revolves around research and law. All Brussels sprouts and no pizza. See, when you have a damaged, broken, lunatic protagonist who has deep psychological issues and gets caught up in danger and criminality, the thrill of the show, there's always a character who has to be responsible. These are the cleaners, the ones who have to take care of the protagonists or participate in the plot's exposition, so that we can watch the lead spiral out of control, take drugs, make drugs, or beat people up in a superhero outfit. Responsibility isn't fun. And there is something to be said about assigning women these roles. But even in proactive roles for women, I still see a difference. Take Dominique DePiro, hotshot detective. I think it's very easy to give this type of character a sharp attitude and let the plot dictate who this person is. Being a detective isn't a character to me, nor is having a bionic arm. Someone's occupation can say something about them, but a person is a person regardless of what they do for a living.
No English? Okay, thank you.
When I think about Dom, I kind of love her, and it's not because of any of her detective scenes.
Kinda hot. Am I right?
I love her defining trait of loneliness.
Amelia? You marry me?
Alexa, are you alone?
And these scenes don't just comment on her character, but they recontextualize all of her detective scenes. Suddenly her work isn't something she does because she's a hotshot, but because she's so empty inside that her work is all she has.
And this?
Also lollipops. And the greatest specificity a show can give you is actual empathy for a fictional character. When two characters confront each other with two totally different end goals, but the reason behind everything they did is compelling, suddenly you're backed into a unique situation, rooting for two different sides. Every character in Mr. Robot is given a detail to make them memorable, whether it's BDSM, a cat Instagram, or an obsession with Seinfeld.
Not only did the homies do jack shit, they also laughed at this fat dude while he was getting mugged.
Rather than a crime boss who's shrouded in mystery for the sake of mystery, a trans woman with an obsession with time who uses a socially acceptable masculine persona to conduct business, or the details of the background. A woman watching VR on the subway, or the many uses of the F Society mascot.
If you have any interest in waking from your slumber, in retrieving lost, damaged, or stolen memory, we are here for you. We have your back. We are F Society.
Angela Moss can be vague, but I'm also not as bored when I watch her scenes, or the show overall. And the key difference is scene construction. When I think about a really good scene, I think, is it worth watching later, alone, as if I was watching a clip on YouTube?
His followers, nothing but addicts who want their hit of bullshit to keep their dopamine of ignorance. Addicts, afraid to believe the truth, that there's no order, there's no power.
The problem with Karen is I wouldn't really look for any of her scenes isolated. Maybe I'd watch clips of The Punisher or some action scenes, but other than her date with Matt, I would probably pass. So what does Mr. Robot do differently? Well, first it uses multiple layers simultaneously. Take a humdrum expositional scene about a police investigation, film it in one take, and then bam, cut to this, and you've created something new and multifaceted. The scene is no longer just about a topic, it's about a topic and a relationship. Or for instance, when a random banker is arrested. If nothing else happened, I would call it standard. But instead, it's punctuated by Angela listening to her self-help track.
My beliefs create my own reality. All of my dreams are coming true right now.
The scene is no longer just a necessary plot point, it's a plot point fused with insight into Angela. Which leads me to my second point, music and sound. Mr. Robot is so cool to watch because of how it uses music. It can make a scene feel paranoid. It can make a rant feel epic.
We live in a kingdom of bullshit. A kingdom you've lived in for far too long. So don't tell me about not being real. I'm no less real than the fucking beef patty in your Big Mac. As far as you're concerned, Elliot, I am very real.
Mr. Robot also has incredible montages centered entirely around music.
A future filled with friends and family.
And you can maybe see a cinematic difference when you look at a montage from Daredevil. The music is generic rock music with scenes of the bad guys looking at stuff intercut over matte boxing. The music is irrelevant and the images aren't selected and edited for the music either, so it results in a series of things happening rather than a wholly specific sequence. Or Daredevil uses music that's expected. Let's say a rich person with a certain madness about them getting dressed. Versus Mr. Robot. And lastly, the focus on a sequence rather than one individual scene. The problem with any generic show, not just Daredevil, is a worn-out formula where one character does something, then that character does something, then the other character does something, and it feels like each element is only moving forward in their own given moments, as opposed to a group of scenes linked together by either narrative, themes, or music. You can really tell the balance of power by watching how characters influence their counterparts. For instance, in the episode Condemned, Daredevil and the Kingpin are playing a tense game of cat and mouse, and it's really successful at building suspense. Their decisions in their own scenes affect the other.
You're a child playing at being a hero.
No, I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just a guy that got fed up with men like you, and I decided to do something about it.
Thus, the scenes are collaborative. But on the sideline are scenes of Foggy and Karen at the hospital, affected by what Matt does, but not directly affecting what he does.
Matt, it's Karen. Again. Where are you? Just please give us a call when you get this.
And their scenes could be shuffled anywhere because their story isn't running parallel with the main one, it's being dragged along. A perfect example in Mr. Robot happens in episode 10 of season 2, ending in one of the best scenes, but more importantly preceded by one of the greatest build-ups. Overall, this is a 10-minute sequence, divided between 3 individual scenes, pushing and pulling on each other directly and thematically. The fact that you know this is a sequence is that the same music is played over all of it. Another example of how music can connect characters in seemingly unrelated scenes. The dialogue is cut up and distributed appropriately throughout the sequence, and we jump back and forth between our main characters, whose relationships are the most important. Unlike the unbalanced nature of Daredevil, where Matt and Wilson Fisk are battling for New York's soul, and Karen and Foggy are watching the events unfold on TV, every character and their decisions are directly tied to each other. On one side of the triangle, you have Dom, the detective we've been watching all season. She has a relationship with all of these characters. These 4 characters participated in the 5-9 attack, the case that she's trying to solve, and they all comment on this feeling of being hunted.
I am so sick of always worrying about switching cabs and phones and trains and always looking behind.
Just calm down, okay?
I can't keep pretending like this is gonna go away.
Linking them to Dom. On another side, you have Darlene and Cisco, who are laying low after dropping off a man at the hospital. The relationship with Dom is pretty clear, but in this sequence in particular, notice how both of these triangle points are couples. Elliot and Angela kiss, and Darlene and Cisco enjoy a real moment of happiness before it all goes away. So there's a thematic link of love amidst all this chaos. Plot-wise, if Darlene and Cisco are arrested, that spells trouble for Elliot and Angela. You could say Elliot and Angela aren't related to the other 2 plots. And they are less related, but they're actually given a substantial importance in this sequence. We know about the law-criminal relationship between Dom and these 2, but more specifically, Dom has previously put pressure on Angela, which she mentions.
An FBI agent came to my place.
Then they cut to Dom. A mental connection is formed.
I will fix
I'm gonna confess.
That not only establishes a future encounter with Dom, but it also spells trouble for Darlene and Cisco. If she turns herself in, they will go down too. Now there's a direct relationship. And just to punctuate the sequence with a thematic relationship.
How am I supposed to help the ones I care about when every step I take puts them in greater danger? This was my plan, and I hid in the cage while everyone else took all the risk.
And there you have it. 3 scenes given equal importance suddenly colliding together. And nobody has to say any of this. It's just that their scenes are ordered and assembled in a way that makes you care about all of them. The visuals, the music, the character traits, and the sequences all lead to a better recollection of details that Daredevil, despite being fairly entertaining, doesn't have. Daredevil encourages a passive viewing experience, meant to be binged and oftentimes ignored. Mr. Robot is willing to take risks, giving each scene something noteworthy, like a signature, and it pays off. Maybe that alienates viewers, but it takes a lot of integrity. So when the Dark Army arrives at the diner, after swells in music and emotional triumph and cinematic interplay and building tension, this countdown is completely earned in one last perfectly executed long take.